Good Saturday morning and welcome to a special edition of the KALH Spectrum News Information Saturday feature, a time when, during the course of the week, we come across a news story that we're able to cover on the news, but for which there's a lot more information than what we can get into one of our regular newscasts. That's the case today after having conducted an interview with Darlene Bassette, who facilitates a workshop called Surviving Domestic Abuse. Her current 12-week workshop is about mid-course, so it's too late for somebody to join this round, but there will be more editions of this course offered, and we feel the information she shared with us during the interview she needs to share with you. We're meeting with Darlene Bassette from Alamogordo, who we got acquainted with as a result of a public service announcement that we have been broadcasting here periodically about a class that's being conducted for survivors of domestic abuse. How are you this morning?
I'm great. Thank you, Ken.
Tell us a little bit, give us some background on this domestic abuse survivors workshop that you're conducting. And you're about in the middle of the process now.
I'm in the middle of the class that I'm teaching now. I started teaching the class at the Cope Shelter last August through December, right there at the shelter. And then I just started this new class in February. It's a 12-week free workshop designed to help victims end the addictive pattern of abusive relationships. And it's structured after a book called The Betrayal Bond by Dr. Patrick J. Carnes.
And once this class is through, I'm sure you'll probably be starting another.
Yes, I'm actually working with the person up at NMSU to teach it through the continuing education up there at the college in the fall.
So things we say today rings true for somebody in our audience. They may want to watch and listen because we'll be promoting the fact that it's happening once it comes around again. This is too much of an intensive course to try to jump in on the middle of it.
Yeah, that's correct. It's a progressive kind of course. It goes through the book, and I also use other resources such as The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, which is a course to help unblock our artistic selves. People who live in abusive situations get beaten down emotionally, spiritually, as well as physically, and often give up things that are important to them, people that are important to them. So part of the course is also to help people find themselves again.
Just who are we talking about as far as potential people who would be interested in taking this course?
Well, I don't close the course to anyone. It's primarily women are interested in taking the course, and I don't deny that men do find themselves in abusive situations, but the majority of domestic violence is male on female. But I have also had people from the lesbian gay community, of course, suffer in domestic violence situations, and men do as well. At this point, the primary interest is women.
And define for us what might constitute an abusive relationship.
In the particular course is designed for people who suffer from what's called trauma bonding, which is a dysfunctional, intense attraction or bond to a person who is toxic to them. And it occurs in the presence a lot of times, or most of the time, of fear and danger in the situation. Fear is something that intensifies a trauma bond, but it also includes nobility and righteousness on that person's part. In other words, no one's a total monster. And the person becomes bonded into a cycle of abuse where there's a build-up period, there's a trigger, there's an explosion with violence and demeaning, and then it falls into a remorse period and I'm sorry and a honeymoon period. But the victim mistakes that for love and gets trapped in that cycle.
This is the kind of exhilaration I guess people have when they jump out of perfectly good airplanes.
I did that once, yeah. It's that kind of exhilaration. And that is a big part of the cycle, is that drama and dysfunction and stress become the norm for the person, so they mistake that intensity for love and intimacy.
These abusive relationships don't usually start off right away that way.
No, as Dr. Carnes explains it, usually there's the very beginning of a trauma bond. There's 5 types of betrayal. And the first is seduction. And there's usually what's called a love bomb. And he describes it as something that, and by the way, these trauma bonds can happen to people not just in their personal relationships, but in groups, cults, and he talks about the same type of trauma bonding occurring between a hostage and a victim, Stockholm syndrome, but this all applies those same elements to the personal relationships. But it starts with the seduction and the story in the beginning and uniqueness in the couple. Sometimes the abuse happens dramatically, right away in the beginning. Sometimes it builds up over time with just little acts of degradation, criticisms, accusations, expectations that the abuser's needs are the main needs that need to be met. And it builds up over time, but the victim becomes bonded into believing that they're responsible for the relationship and the happiness in the relationship. So they try to please the abuser and get trapped in that cycle.
Whenever the abuser falls short of their expectations, it becomes the fault of the partner.
Once again, you've failed to meet my needs. It was something that I often heard. The victim believes that love is meeting that other person's needs, which it is, of course, but in a healthy relationship, it's mutual and a covenant that works both ways. In an abusive relationships, it's one-sided.
These relationships often fall into a pattern of repetition. Someone who is in an abusive relationship and somehow manages to get out of it for one reason or another, either through abandonment or their own efforts, end up back in another one. How does that happen?
Dr. Carnes, and I'm going to refer, because the course is structured after this book. I don't want to take any credit for the course material. And what he talks about is until a person goes through a process of rewriting the scripts that often they've learned in childhood, if they come from an abusive household or they start out and have one abusive relationship, and scripts form, they seek that same kind of situation and pattern.
Even though they may consciously say, I never want to do that again.
Exactly. And he talks about coping mechanisms that are learned in our early years that contribute to making the trauma bond stronger, but the person seeks out that same kind of relationship as if to try to fix it. Like, second time around, now I know what to do to make this work. And what they're failing to understand is what real love is and what healthy relationships and healthy coping mechanisms are. And especially in terms of setting boundaries for themselves. It's often people who fail to understand how to set boundaries with people.
And in situations like this, generally the victim at some point realizes this is not something that's normal.
There comes a point where there's what he calls a life crisis. There's a saying that what we can tolerate, we cannot change. Or doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. And there is, hopefully, before a person gets beaten too badly, there's a life crisis that will get her out of the situation. Or often that's what it takes to get the person out of the situation. And in my personal situation, I reached that life crisis where I realized I was afraid of this man that I was with, that my life could be in danger, and that if I didn't make a change, as hard as it was, that it could lead down that road to physical violence and possibly death.
So often that, in my observation over the years, the abuser brings about an isolation for the victim so that they don't feel there's anybody out there that can help them. It would have to be on their own, and that's tough.
Yes, that is tough, and it can happen. Physical isolation, in my situation, it was where my family members and friends couldn't tolerate being around the two of us together because they witnessed how he treated me and they didn't like it, but they couldn't talk to me about it because I defended him, which is often the case. The victim becomes the rescuer and defends the abuser and makes excuses and tries to cover it up. Part of it is shame and humiliation or embarrassment, but a big part of it is you actually you live in that abuser's world and actually start to believe their perspective of looking at things, which can be deadly.
And it's all my fault.
And it's all my fault, but also I know with my ex-husband, he had a very criminal perspective on the world, and I actually got drawn into agreeing with him on things that normally I wouldn't in terms of his perspective of the world.
Even when someone gets to the point of realizing for their own safety or safety of the children or whatever, they have to get out. That's a huge, huge step for someone to make.
It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of help. And that's where places like women's shelters come in, COPE here, both to live in and also for the resources. Even like in my situation, I had family. So when I left my ex-husband from another state, I had my family help me get a place to live. I got a job. So I didn't need to live in a shelter, but the resources at COPE are invaluable in terms of counseling, legal services, just support, and helping understand. Like in my situation, it wasn't physical, and a lot of women feel, well, I'm not abused because I didn't get beaten up. They don't understand the depth of emotional and psychological abuse and the scars that leaves as well.
And finding help out there, while a lot of women don't realize it's there, it is available, and very readily so. Here on our radio station, we talk quite frequently about where they can find help. COPE is one we mentioned, and they're readily available, but even closer to home, neighborhood churches or most anywhere is a door you can walk through. The police, the sheriff's department, all of these people are trained to understand the needs of someone in this situation and can at least provide you a direction to go.
The main thing is to reach out and get help. I would urge calling the COPE helpline because they've been here for so many years. They've got so many resources and professional people, and they can direct people. And
the COPE helpline is a toll-free call, 1-866-350-2673. Again, that number for the COPE helpline is 866-350-2673.
Going into the church or your doctor, even friends, but the main thing is to ask for help and then take that step to get out of the situation.
And then once you're out of the situation, there's a great deal of things that need to be done personally for yourself to try to get you back into shape to be able to cope in the world and hopefully maybe find another relationship someday that won't be abusive.
Unfortunately, a lot of people get out of the situations and then look for that next relationship too soon before they have a chance to heal and end up back into the similar kind of situation because they haven't changed and healed from those dysfunctional coping mechanisms that they have.
It's a retraining of yourself.
It's an important, and that's why I decided to facilitate the workshop based on research that's been done about domestic violence, and to change things in yourself so that you don't seek out a next abusive relationship. But it takes time to heal, and especially when there are children involved, they're wounded by it as well. So taking the step to get help, starting a new life, taking time, and regaining yourself spiritually and emotionally is important.
in terms of counseling and so forth, there's a lot of that available here in the community through COPE and through other sources.
That's correct.
And that's a first step, is to get involved in some of that counseling to try to understand the situation.
That's correct. And one thing that I learned personally, and that a lot of professionals will talk about too, is that counseling needs to be one-on-one for the victim. A lot of times victims talk their abusers to going into couples counseling with them, which is a great thing if it's not an abuse situation. If it's a situation where a married couple needs help and both are willing, then that can be effective. But a lot of people discover that if there's abuse in the situation, if one person has that kind of power over the other, they can tend to use counseling sessions to further the abuse, and it can actually be more damaging. And that happened with me when I talked my ex into going to a marriage counselor. If there's abuse in the relationship, power and control, exploitation, the victim needs separate counseling to help get out of that.
And as we said here just moments ago, that abuse does not have to be physical, where you end up with broken bones and trips to the hospital and so forth. It can be psychological, which is a lot more subtle.
It comes down to fear. Abusers can have power and control over the victim in the relationship by the threat and the fear that there will be physical abuse or abandonment. I mean, my ex-husband, I lived in fear of what he was going to do, and he was very volatile and would have temper tantrums and smash things, but also get in fights with people. And I felt responsible to keep him calm and happy so that he wouldn't get himself into trouble. And that happens, I think, a lot in these types of relationships where the abuser threatens to get arrested or go drive drunk or smash something, get in trouble, and keeps the victim in a state of fear and trying to meet his needs all the time. She feels responsible for his behavior, and it takes through counseling to accept you're not responsible for the abuser's behavior.
Once they get to this point, this is someplace that a course like what you're offering can kick in. You've made your escape, found the courage that it takes to do that, even the way to do it from a fiscal standpoint of being able to afford to be able to make that break. You've gone to counseling, you've started to get a hold on the situation. Then somebody could benefit from what you're doing in terms of instruction and classwork.
Right, I call it turning suffering into meaning, where giving back for all the people who helped me and supported me, pastors, friends, people in the churches, COPE supporters. I want to give back now, and I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, I'm not an advisor, I'm a facilitator in this particular book, and there's many books also. I just happened, this happened to be the one that helped me wake up to, I need to change some things about how I relate to people in general to understand what happened to me. So teaching the course, and that's why I'm not trying to make a career out of teaching, but it's just to guide people through what I went through. I spent 8 months in very intensive work in this book, and what I got out of it was really important to me, and I believe can help other people so that they can change how they get into relationships with people, I guess. So, but like I said, turning suffering into meaning is part of my recovery.
Once someone decides that this is a course that could benefit them based upon what they've heard here today, and as you noted, here at some future time, in the not too distant future, you're going to have another course beginning, hopefully through NMSU Alamogordo. People need to be prepared to work hard to do this. This is not a course that's going to be an easy course for them to get through.
Yes, that's correct. I'm at this point. It's a 12-week course, once a week for 2 hours. There's the book, and then I put together worksheets, and we work together and we share in the group. But it takes a lot of work at home. There's making lists of abuses, inventories of conflict and how you handle them, thinking about the 5 types of betrayal, and there's a lot of writing. There's daily writing and journaling. So yeah, it's a lot of work. And like I said, some of it's very painful. But through that pain is where you grow and where you recover. And a big part of the course is spiritual work as well. Reconnecting with God, whoever God is to you. I am a Christian. But the group is the workshop's open to anyone wherever they're at on their spiritual journey and whatever their faith is. But it's a big part in putting your faith in your higher power or your God, to know what love is from that rather than from this world and worldly relationships, and have that be what guides your relationships.
And as we noted that once this next class gets organized and we've got something definite on that, stay in touch with us and we'll get that word out to our listeners. And you're not trying to save the world; you're trying to save some folks one at a time.
Oh, I can't save anybody. Trying to teach and share my experience, and for me, what it is letting God use my life for good, to help other people. And even if somebody comes to one class or just gets the book, I think it's a step for them. And in just knowing that domestic violence, relationships, abuse in relationships is not normal. It's not what God intended for marriage to be.
It's not your fault.
It's not the victim's fault. And both people are broken, if you will. Both people suffer.
If somebody would like to get a preview of what they might expect from this and to learn more about this whole process, how can they do that?
Well, there is a podcast of my story at copedv.podbean.com. And also on the COPE website, my classes are posted on there. COPE is not a sponsor of my class. I want to be clear about that. They are a great supporter of the work that I'm doing, and the people there I depend on for their expertise and guidance. So they're not a sponsor of me, but they, as we say on the website, they're a friend of me in the course that I'm teaching, and I am a volunteer at COPE.
And tell us the book again that you're basing this on and where that might be available.
It's called The Betrayal Bond, Breaking Free of Exploitive Relationships by Patrick J. Carnes, Ph.D. He's the author of many best-selling books about addictions, and he has a recovery center in Arizona, I believe. Yes, it's in Arizona. He has a website, but you can order the book from Amazon.com as well. And it's about a $10 book. It's not a large book, but a great book. And it's not a new book. It's been around for, I think, about 15 years.
Well, we really appreciate your joining us today. And for our listeners who may have joined us in the middle here, we've been talking with Darlene Bassette. And Darlene is offering courses that the one currently is in progress and it's free, but it's a little late to join this course in progress. We need you, if you have been inspired in some fashion, to look towards this. And you can also find some more information via email if you just drop a note to Darlene at doerecovery@gmail.com. Once again, that's doerecovery@gmail.com. She'll be happy to communicate with you and provide you additional information about this topic. And hopefully you will find whatever you need to in the way of courage or wherewithal, if you are in an abusive relationship, to make that break and find healing for yourself. And also stay tuned here to 95.1 FM KALH. As we noted, when the next class gets started, we'll have information about that. And anytime about any of the subjects that you hear discussed here on KALH, if you need contact information and didn't get a chance to write it down, email addresses, and that podcast address again is copedv@podbean.com. And it's PODBEAN. copedv.podbean.com, where you can get a listen to the podcast featuring Darlene's story. We'll always be able to provide those for you. So just drop me a note at the old familiar address, kalhradio@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to get that information back to you. So we appreciate you visiting with us today, Darlene.
And I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about this and get the word out to people. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Anytime you have any information you'd like to share, just give me a call. For today, Ken Bass, 95.1 FM, KALH. This has been a special edition of the KALH Spectrum News Saturday feature. Our guest has been Darlene Bassette, speaking on surviving domestic abuse. If you would like to hear this interview again, or if you have someone you think may need to hear this interview, it's posted right now at KALH.org on the news page. Just click the news tab at the top of the home page and pull down to the Spectrum News Saturday on-demand audio player. It'll be up there for at least 1 week. For this time till next time, I'm Ken Bass.